I want to switch here now to you on the question of presidential temperament. So the president had a lot of things happen this week. He was in the Rose Garden twice. He gave a powerful eulogy at the end of the week. But he was also on a podcast, which is new for presidents. And he said on the podcast,
garage.
Yeah, that's right. We've gone from the fireside to the podcast. He said in the podcast, "I know what I'm doing, and I'm fearless. I've screwed up, I've been in the barrel tumbling down Niagara Falls, and I've emerged and I've lived." And that's such a liberating feeling.
You know what? I think what he said is true of him. I think he's 6.5 years into a rock'em sock'em presidency. I think he just had one of the great weeks that a modern president could have. Part of it luck, part of it chance, part of it fortune, but what the heck? What it is what it is. You can tell some part of him has made a turn, and he is coming out of some doldrums. I saw it at the church when he spoke. That was not a defeated person. That was a guy who was thinking, I am in good shape and I am happy. And it was about as comfortable as I've seen him, and as moving as I have seen, as moving an event as I've seen a president involved in.
As moving and as real. You know, we live in an age of scripted politics. You cannot script a president singing Amazing Grace a cappella in the way that he did. I don't think anybody who watched it will ever forget it.
He felt it. He was really in the moment there. I mean, he is from the black church. We were joking on Twitter, and many people were saying in the congregation, Reverend President instead of Mr. President, but on Twitter I kept saying President in Chief. I mean, he wrote this from the depths of his soul. He wrote the majority of this speech, and he may have had a couple of pieces added in from, help from some people that he knew, but he really felt this moment because it's a time now. We are a nation that's pregnant for change. I mean, again, this week we saw the N-word. We saw him bring out the N-word in that Garage podcast because he wanted the nation to see, after what happened in Charleston, we are still a nation that's hypersensitive on the issue of race from any spectrum that you are on the spectrum in. And then also the issue of the Confederate flag. Reince Priebus, I talked to him earlier this week, the head of the Republican National Committee. He said, we are more united than we are divided. We are a nation that is pregnant with change right now when it comes to issues of race. And he spoke to it and sang to it. Amazing Grace.
Ron, you think a lot about how conservatives can meet the modern moment. Is there a way in which the conservative voice has a way to play in this conversation to answer what the president's talking about?
Well, I think that there are ways for conservatives to connect with minority voters and with this larger change that April is referring to. But I want to caution everyone in this one small way. There is what you might call a north-south discourse of race relations in our country that is very black-white, and that's something that we are wrestling with right now. But I'd remind everyone at home, in 2016, about 18% of the population will be Latino. Only in 2028 will 18% of the electorate be Latino. And my question is, a lot of that Latino population of this country is still very young. They're not voting yet, but we do not know what those politics will look like when we go from this north-south discussion to an east-west discussion. Because in the West, we've been a multiracial country for a long time, and that's becoming more of a reality in more places. And I think that to imagine that, well, Latinos and blacks will have exactly the same kind of demands, they're all minorities after all, or that, we do not know what this is going to look like. And I think that actually that is the subtext of the immigration debate. We talk about this purely through immigration, but in fact, this Latino population, this rising generation, has a lot of distinctive challenges that it faces, and I think that it will have a lot of distinctive demands that it will make, and that is really the thing that conservatives ought to look to.
Very great points, I believe, but at the same time, I'm going to go back to Bill Clinton. I covered him 18 years ago, and when he started talking about the issue of race in America, bringing the nation together, he talked about it as a heart issue. He looked at it both in two fronts, heart and legislative, but it's mostly from the heart. As a man thinketh, so are we. You think about it and you come from the heart and then you legislate. But when he was dealing with the issue of race, he started with the young people because young people were different. They didn't have that the remembrance and the history of a segregated South. They didn't remember that. So I understand the East versus the West, but the South versus the North. But I think as a nation, we have minorities, African Americans and Hispanics, who are two totally different groups. But at the same time, our young people are coming together more than our older people. And I go back back to what President Obama said Friday, Jamal versus Jimmy, who's going to get the job? And I think the younger people are into both Jimmy and Jamal.
Okay. Final question, David, to you. There have been a lot of talk about threats in advance of July 4th. What can you tell us?
After Friday's attacks that killed more than 60 people on 3 continents abroad, U.S. officials are worried. There are FBI investigations in more than 50 states. There is concern that the motivation of lone wolves is happening. Right. As of Friday, I was told there are no specific threats that the FBI knows of.
Have to leave it there. Thank you, David.